everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics today. This is Solidarity Friday episode with Kyle and Joe. Hope you're doing well out there. Kyle, how are you doing?
Doing well. In a new location, so it's nice. And it's still nice here on the East Coast. I think it was 70 in the 70s yesterday. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I haven't really gone outside in a couple days too much. It's picking up with snow here. Really excited. I might be able to go ski the day this airs for the first time in the year. So
I was going to ask, is the mountain open yet?
Yeah, so Keystone's all open. Breckenridge should be open on Friday. Really excited about it. And hopefully, like, it's a whole lottery system now. It's a whole situation. So I'm hoping to get access for Friday, but we'll see.
Sweet.
Yeah. So otherwise, things are going pretty well here. Haven't seen any civil war yet. I think we need a couple more weeks to see what happens there. But I'm excited for, all these wins. Like, we had so many interesting psychedelic wins. Like, what was it? Washington, D.C. voted to decriminalize psychedelic plants, which is pretty amazing. Plants and fungi. And then Oregon passed that psilocybin initiative, which is amazing. And also that drug decriminalization bill, which I need to figure out more. I think I understand it, but I'm also like not totally sure I get it. Seems to be mixed responses on if it's all drugs or just 8 drugs.
Right.
Some people say, yes, it's all drugs, and other people don't. Even like New York Times said some drugs. So right. I don't know. I'd love to have a firm answer there. I guess if I don't have a clear answer in a few weeks, the consensus opinion wins. That it's totally
I remember going through that document. It was kind of confusing. Or just the way they had it all like lined up.
Because it was individual drugs. It wasn't classes of drugs. It was, these 8 drugs.
Yeah.
Perhaps it was just indicating these as examples. It's like, this is what we think possession quantity is here, or intent to distribute is here. Here's how the sentencing is going to change. Like, maybe that's what they were doing. But it's, it's a little confusing, but whatever. At least it happened. It's a good thing either way. Yeah, and I'm excited. So we have 2 years before we'll see psilocybin therapy available in Oregon. And I'm sure this is another psychedelic gold rush. It's going to be a little awkward, but really interesting too. There's rules in place where you have to be a resident for 2 years in the state of Oregon to be a therapist or facilitator. And there's going to be some really special training rules. The state's got 2 years to really figure it out. And what I find interesting is that the state could put up educational rules in 2 years that could push it out another bunch of months. I think like you have to go through these education programs in order to be qualified, which could be interesting. I don't know how that's really going to play out, but just a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Do we want to jump right in or do any more kind of intro stuff? I mean, I guess we're already doing it.
Yeah, let's just talk about election stuff for a minute.
Cool.
Yeah, I think there's a speculation that because the Democratic Party seems to have done really well, that cannabis will be decriminalized at a federal level. I've been told this by some cannabis industry insiders, which I think would be really helpful on account of federal banking stuff. Like just individuals driving money around and like having huge piles of cash around. Like doesn't seem safe for anybody.
And you guys probably saw that firsthand when Colorado. Yeah. I remember watching High Profits and that whole section about it.
Oh yeah, I did a couple photo shoots with lots of cash.
Yeah,
on one of those trips, and it's weird. It's such a strange situation. You got to like transfer that cash into money orders and then pay the people you owe money to, like the landlord and the electric company and whatnot. Like, it's kind of crazy how that
and it's
whole
still
thing.
Like that, or did they change anything on the state level there?
I think they tried to. I haven't been paying too close attention the last year or so. I think they tried to, but I don't really know what that means. But any institution that handles money is more under federal law, and they have to really worry about the feds because FDIC insurance and stuff like Western Union for money orders. Like they have to watch really carefully for money laundering, and unfortunately that puts people in a tough spot. So you got to go to 20 Western Unions to get all the money orders you need and put it through.
Man.
Yeah, it was something else. Anyway, that looks optimistic. And in your state, Kyle, New Jersey, looks like recreational cannabis will be legal soon. And you've already got medical?
We already have medical here. And then, legalized recreational use. I think it was over 60% said yes, which I think everybody knew it was probably going to pass. It was really hopeful. I mean, that was Governor Phil Murphy's like selling point when he was running was I'll have recreational cannabis legalized in the first 100 days of being in office. And well, that didn't happen. It seemed like there was a lot of fighting in the House, probably just over like little things about tax revenue and, all those little things. So, it's been years coming down the pipeline. And so I'm glad that the voters voted yes on that. We'll see. They did make a statement in multiple news outlets mentioning that, don't start sparking up just yet if you don't have a medical card, and don't be dumb because it's still illegal and cops will continue to arrest unless they, push through this decriminalization bill that I think they've been working on as well, or until like the attorney general or whoever, might give like towns permission to maybe not arrest or, prosecute people. So they need to put their regulatory board and, their whole process together, just like every other state, before people can legally purchase and acquire.
Did they put any
cannabis.
timeline in place?
I don't remember. I think they're trying to do it as soon as possible,
Cool.
but who knows how the state kind of moves slowly. But again, who knows? Maybe they won't, because it's a lot of tax money to get generated, and they already have the medical infrastructure in place. So maybe it could be a transition, but I could imagine, I've heard multiple things of people with medical cards, like just not being able to get certain things and how backed up it is at times. So, maybe there is an issue. Just thinking about growing and creating all those facilities, could take a while to get established.
Right. In the early days in Colorado, there was a lot of black market activity verging into like retail. So like black market growers would actually just show up at shops and try to sell.
Oh, wow.
Right. Because like the tracking wasn't fully there yet. All the regulations weren't super duper tight yet. They are now. Like everything's kind of like seed to sale tracked and like RFID tags and whatnot. So it's really wild. Yeah. I don't really know what to make of that, other than like there's a chance that there would be a lot of black market activity helping, the above board industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm hopeful. Like hopefully you guys get it before it gets too snowy and dark.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Do you know anybody that's had a medical card in New Jersey?
Yeah, I have a few friends that have them.
Cool.
and a few people that have them. So
yeah, the medical pricing here is crazy low. Like you have to go to the mass market shops to get it, but it's like just insane. Like what was it? 500 milligrams of edibles for like 20 or $15 or something crazy like that. Just nuts. That's why I got these like 50 milligram gummies now. And I'm like, this is a little scary, but if it's that good of a deal. Yeah.
50 milligram gummies? Wow.
Yeah, terrifying, right? They've been around for ages though. And there's a chocolate bar that's like 1,000, I think.
Oh, that makes sense. You could split those up, but I'm just thinking a gummy is so easy to just eat one of those.
So we sit there with a chef's knife and cut it up real small.
The little slithers. Yeah.
So that's fun. Now, was there anything special about DC? Well, I think the interesting thing there is that politicians, not like they don't already have plenty of access to these things. They might be more, and staffers in DC might be more inclined to use psychedelics, which could open up the door for greater, increased rapidity of drug law reform.
Mm-hmm.
Speculation. We'll see.
I mean, it was really interesting to watch all this stuff unfold in election night. So maybe we'll just, come back and just kind of put out these bullet points to keep it a little coherent. I feel like we've been a little bit over the board. So the things that passed during election night was, Oregon, Measure 109 with legalizing the psilocybin therapy. So they won 56% majority vote on Measure 109. And then they also passed the Measure 110 to decriminalize drug possession. And we've chatted about 109 in the past. We also have an episode with Sherry, right? Is Sherry their name?
Tom and Sherry Eckert.
Yeah, if you want to go back and listen to that. And then 109, the drug possession in Oregon decriminalized. And so, and then DC decriminalized plant medicine. So that was another big win. And I thought this was really interesting. 76% of voters in favor in DC. And I was kind of thinking about it, and I was thinking, well, you kind of, it's kind of like like an intellectual hotspot, right? And most people are probably already up to date on a lot of this research. But I mean, 76% in the capital, I mean, I don't know. That's really, really interesting to see that. That's huge, it feels like. But again, maybe a lot of folks in that region are already doing this. And just makes sense.
It's hard saying, right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is perhaps where the Christian branches of ayahuasca churches might be really interesting and helpful, because there's a lot of evangelical Christians in DC, especially those in power. And what would happen if, they started getting into the Christian ayahuasca churches, right? And it's like, oh, like maybe we really need to move quickly to federally legalize ayahuasca because there's so much valid religious use happening, or something along those lines. Who knows? But I would love that.
Yeah. And this DC decriminalized plant medicines kind of falls under the decriminalized nature movement. So I think kind of the same guidelines and rules there. So it effectively decriminalizes the non-commercial cultivation, distribution, possession, and use of entheogenic plants and fungi. So that includes plants and fungi, ibogaine, dimethyltryptamine, mescaline, psilocybin, and psilocin. Yeah. So similar initiatives as Oakland, Santa Cruz, and Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yeah.
And again, decriminalization does not mean legalization, folks. So just to put that out there.
And then we've got 4 states legalizing cannabis use for adults: Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota, most of which are pretty amazing. I guess it's amazing that all of them did it. And one of these was South Dakota and Mississippi legalized cannabis for medical use as well, making South Dakota the first to pass medical and recreational laws at the same time, which I think is really fascinating. It's like, let's cut to the chase here. We're losing revenue. We need this. We've got addiction problems. Like, let's, make cannabis available and see what happens. Yeah. South Dakota this winter, it's probably going to be scary and dark. So, hopefully they push this through quickly and it helps some folks with their anxiety.
I remember just watching all this stuff kind of come in on election night and just thinking like, wow, feels like plants have really won the election here. And really the drug war, I think, is showing that it's really failing. And people want to see alternative treatments. I think people want to, break away from this drug war. And I think that just shows like all the initiatives that were up there passed during this election cycle, which is, I don't know, I think that's pretty phenomenal and huge kind of shift in a way, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that we're finally at this point, shows that, us and people that have been doing this work for ages, longer than us, finally making headway. Science and appropriate attitudes, towards these things are winning. It's no longer just drug war propaganda. There's plenty of that left. Like, we post this stuff and we got like 500 crack memes. I guess we're taking the Oregon Trail to Portland and we're going to start using crack all the time. It's like, well, that's not really the point. People, like I would, at the same time, some of these memes are kind of funny. They're also just like showing that people don't understand what they're making jokes about.
I feel like it continues to kind of stigmatize drug use and
totally
in a way, right? It's like, it was interesting to see the crack memes come out of Oregon so much versus like, let's just think about the social justice component here of not arresting people and filling prisons because they have simple possession charges, right?
Yeah.
Not ruining people's lives, maybe get them actually like mental health or regular health care. They need it. I think that's the bigger issue I see with drug policy reform is just being able to provide health services to people that may need it instead of just locking them away, eating up taxpayer dollars on, somebody that shouldn't be clogging the prison system.
Right. They didn't kill somebody. They didn't even punch somebody usually. And they're in jail for years. Like, what makes it okay to put a person in a cage ever? Maybe if it's for the safety of others. Like, I don't even think prison really reforms people. Like they say, what's the phrasing? Are you feeling like corrected or something? It's like the correctional facility. It's like, no, I don't feel reformed. Like I know a lot more now about how to do crime, and I'm probably going to do that because it's more lucrative than working at XYZ place that doesn't pay well. Also, crime is a lot more exciting, honestly. So
Yeah.
it's a tough deal. Like when it's illicit, it's much more fun.
Yeah. And I know this is like kind of different, but maybe a little bit similar, but just even thinking about like the lockdowns and how people were like so isolated, and just what that does to your mental health, and just thinking about being in prison, right? Tougher environment. And, at least people might have been a little cushy in their lockdown, right? In their apartment, in their own space, and still feeling overwhelm, anxiety, depression, all these different things come up, and how it's really, causing a lot of pain. So just convert that to a more intense environment for a longer period of time because you possessed a substance, got caught using a substance that maybe you're using to try to escape, try to medicate yourself a little bit, right? To feel better, to ease some of the pain that you're suffering. Just doesn't seem humane.
We had a conversation with a psychiatrist not that long ago talking about using ketamine, maybe not even cap, maybe just straight up ketamine, as kind of like a crutch to get people through the winter. Because suicidality is going to be through the roof. Depression is going to be through the roof in a couple months. And, why not use this cheap, safe drug to prevent suicide and depression in a lot of people? I thought that was a really cool idea. And I talked to another psychiatrist yesterday, and he said yesterday he treated 6 ketamine psychotherapy patients, all of whom were showing suicidality and no longer show suicidality. And it's like that. So it's like, what are we doing?
And was that remote or
I actually don't know.
In person?
I don't know. They've got an in-person clinic. I don't know if they're doing telehealth or not. It's a great question though.
Because I remember the psychiatrist we were talking about wasn't even thinking about psychotherapy, just being able to prescribe the substance and people could like do it at home.
Right.
Which is much different, right?
It's a lot cheaper. Maybe not super fun and pleasant, but maybe it is. I don't know. Like it's interesting, right? Like we hear about bliss a lot in mushroom and LSD stuff, but we don't hear about it in ketamine. So maybe that makes it like safer that we don't have that like up and down roller coaster that can come up.
Right.
In classical psychedelics. So, there's something there. I think it could be really helpful. It could save a lot of lives. And it's, it's up to, who has the responsibility to make our culture mentally safe, mentally healthy? Is it the psychiatrists? Is it the AMA, APA? Like who is it? Is there anything? I don't like, it's not like Bhutan that what do they have? The gross national happiness or something like that.
Right.
Like we don't have that. So we're just like, are you able to go to work? Are you killing yourself? Cool. Like if you're going to kill yourself, here's some drugs, but you can go to work still. Cool. Great. So it's like that idea of well-adjusted, and well-adjusted being kind of like nightmare existence.
Right.
For a lot of people. So what do we do? Like, do psychiatrists step up and say like, let's prescribe a lot more ketamine just to get through this winter, or what? Or do we just let them all die? I don't know. Like,
it's an interesting conversation to have. And I guess like an interesting approach of, we have these medicines. Could they be effective for treating this like massive potential mental health, issue that could be arising in the winter? And, if we start seeing more lockdowns and COVID cases increasing, which we're already starting to see, right? How are people going to fare during the winter? I just kept thinking like, oh man, like, this is really, it was much better knowing that COVID started hitting in the spring and the sun was returning. It started getting warmer. I was able to like, go outside and garden, spend more time outside. But now thinking about like lockdowns, the days are short. I hate that it's like dark by 5 o'clock now, And so, yeah, it's like, if we have this, like, it's kind of like a weird thing of like thinking about, just treating people with like drugs and that stigma still, right? Versus like, or this could be a tool that really helps save a lot of people's lives. And what's the risk benefit analysis here long term for people's mental health, well-being, and maybe just surviving through, maybe a really, really difficult time? And could some of these medicines, if we were able to get them accessible and lower the cost, could that be more effective than somebody just keeping going to the liquor store? during this time. I don't know.
Right. Liquor stores, cannabis dispensaries are all essential businesses somehow. I think it's because it's a way for people to cope.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if you're, kind of a somewhat average American worker, and all of a sudden you can't get beers or like vodka or something. Like, I bet people would freak out.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And, same thing with cannabis now. It's like become very essential in Colorado. Like, there's more probably. I think beer people are seeing like a decrease in sales because the use is going up. So I think that's inherently a good thing, honestly. But yeah, like, what does that mean? Like, if they can't get it? And what if we add more drugs that are also safe and helpful, like ketamine? Yeah. Like, we've had some pretty horrendous medical issues on my side recently, and we had some time in the ER and also some time at some regular doctor's offices. And I was chatting to you a little bit earlier about this, and I was getting really frustrated because we were requesting Ambien. We were requesting a sleep aid, and they refused it. And it just really pissed me off. I'm like, this is a pretty safe drug. They said, no, we don't do that. This is like a Catholic-owned hospital network, which kind of already pisses me off because there's some weirdo restrictions they put on people. They're like, oh, cool, we're going to put your ethics in the way of my doctoring. Perfect. But, the fact that someone wasn't able to sleep for 3 days in a row and probably looked like it was going to continue and they refused to give that really pissed me off. And, it helped me lose respect for doctors again. I love doctors. It's just I get pissed off when I get abuse. Now we're $6,000 in medical debt from a couple ER visits and some other shit. Misdiagnosis both time at the ER, which is dope. And then, we got all this medical debt now. So it's like, okay, cool. Like, you guys screwed up twice, then refused to give us the meds we wanted. And then now we're fucking got to sit tight for a couple weeks and just suffer fest this thing out. It's like, that's, what makes that okay? Like, 2 misdiagnoses that led to excruciating pain for a near week. Like, fuck that. That shouldn't be allowed. And then, cool. Now you're the key holder to all the drugs. It's like, fuck no. Makes me want to have a huge pharmacopoeia just at home, like, which I kind of already do. But, you go to the doctor enough, they overprescribe, and then you just have a lot of leftovers. It's kind of how that worked. And
right.
Some of these drugs, yes, they can be abused a little bit, but does it mean that other people shouldn't have access to them if they want them? Like, I don't really get that.
That's the issue, right? Like, I know some people, I know Jersey really cracked down years ago on opioids, and for good reason, right? A lot of abuse here. I mean, a lot of overdoses here, but I know some people that were like in extreme pain, physical things are wrong with their body, and just really trying to get some either low doses, just things to help with the pain, and, the liability of prescribing stuff to the doctors. It's scary, right? Are they going to come out after me? Are they going to take my medical license away? Stuff like that. So, I feel like I get it from that perspective, but it also really sucks when people are in pain and not being able to get access, just like in your case. It's like, wow, just can we get something prescribed for sleep? I mean, we know how important sleep is. And it's like, don't you want to take care of a person if they're in pain and they need to get to sleep? I mean, I don't know what they were going through on their side, like their clinical response of like, is this appropriate? Like, are there certain liabilities here if we prescribe that to this person? But yeah, I don't know, like, what's the more humane thing to do to somebody versus like just thinking about like, I don't know, medical liabilities. And I think I've always struggled with that with like healthcare in general. It's like, it's funny how like when I've gone to doctors, like they'll definitely try to overprescribe SSRIs at times. But, like when you're looking for maybe some other things to help, it's like a big hassle.
Right. Like SSRIs being so much safer than opioids to prescribe, typically speaking. And then
totally, yeah.
Ambien, like, I don't even understand what the risk profile is. Like, give me 5 Ambien pills. What's your risk profile? Like,
I know some people that got prescribed them and had fun abusing them, but
oh, totally. Like, people totally abuse it, but it's like, why should that make somebody else suffer? And you're right. Like, okay, you need to sleep to heal from this virus situation or whatever it is. And well, you'll get some sleep in, 7 to 10 days once this goes away. It's like, fuck that. No. Like, this is like a holistic situation. You need sleep, you need water, you need calories. Like, there's a formula for kind of like healthy recovery. And if you can't have sleep, then what the fuck? Like, melatonin is cool, but it's not for everybody.
Was that their like prescription? Take
years
melatonin?
ago when at the same facility, when I was asking for Ambien for, I was traveling a lot. I was asking for Ambien. They're like, we don't do that. You get, you do melatonin because it's safer. I think that was the same visit they yelled at me for using edibles to help me sleep. I think that was what was going on. I didn't want to travel with edibles. So like I asked for Ambien because I'm like, hey, I use this to go to sleep and it really helps. I'm getting like 9 hours pretty consistently now. I'd love for this to keep going. Yeah. So weird shit. I don't know. It's a struggle. And this is going to extend into psychedelics for sure. Like this kind of same logic. Like, no, you don't qualify yet for MDMA. You don't qualify yet for psilocybin. So therefore you need to put yourself at legal risk to get what you think you need.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Like talking about Ambien, I'm just thinking about somebody that I know that was trying to get, I think they were trying to do like ADD medication just because they're all over the place. And they used cannabis to sleep. And so the doctors wanted him to get off of cannabis. So they prescribed Ambien, said, use this instead. And if you test negative for THC, then we'll prescribe you these ADD medications. So it was interesting that they would,
them fighting words right there. Like, that's horrible. Yeah.
And yeah.
One of my friends actually got his Adderall prescription for his raging ADD revoked because he tested positive for pot. Maybe also cocaine, but he got popped and he's been without his prescription for now 2.5 years from the VA. It's out of control. Yeah. So like these different institutions have different rules, different liabilities. Like a VA doc is probably going to be, a lot more protected than like a, private practice doc. But the VA doc's going to be on a lot tighter regulations on what they can do just based on the healthcare system they're in. Yeah, it's a complicated deal. I don't envy doctors for having to be in that situation. Like, it's really not an easy job.
Yeah, I don't know what that's like.
And I know they're doing the best they can.
Yeah.
It's just, like their rules get in the way of their like compassion and interest in healing people sometimes.
Right. And I'm sure some of them would love to be able to, help to that capacity, and maybe their hands are tied, right? There's liability factors and whatnot, where it's like, I don't know if I want to like, put myself in this risk.
So
it's tough.
Catholic healthcare group up here, when they took over the local doctor's office, they put all these kind of birth control rules in place. And then the doctors then had to coach their patients on what to say so that they could give them certain medications. I'm going to need you to say XYZ. Okay, you said XYZ. Perfect. I'm going to put you down for this drug now. It's like, good Lord. You're like institutionalizing lying to doctors, from the doctors to the patients. And it's fucking insane. And like, I've had to lie to doctors. I'm not stoked about it, but I've absolutely lied to doctors about, symptoms to get certain things. I've, the amount of money I've spent on healthcare in the last 4 years is out of control. Can't wait to have healthcare insurance again. It's going to be lovely. So, I don't know. End rant, I guess.
Well, I think it brings up like a lot of interesting points here, just in terms of medicalization within psychedelics versus these decriminalization and maybe religious movements that, what are going to be the restrictions here? If somebody is existentially struggling and they feel like a spiritual, mystical experience could benefit them, but they don't meet some sort of criteria, I don't know what Oregon's going to do, right? What are their
baked
rules
into the
be?
law is, so they've got the clinical cases and also like spiritual explorations built in. So it doesn't need to be all medical, which is kind of neat.
Awesome. That's huge. But, I know that's been a fear in general, right? With medicalization, kind of like gatekeeping people's of like, oh, you don't meet criteria. So, we can't provide you this experience. And, I just always kind of come back to something Catherine McLean was mentioning on our one episode years and years ago about death, right? It's like, you don't know when you're going to die. And if here's these substances that you can start to develop a relationship with death with and kind of have that, maybe as Pindar would say, dying before dying, how could that really change your life?
Right.
And who's to say you can't have that experience?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like, what gives somebody the right because you went to school and you've got the authority over these drugs, or like you're in the DEA and someone told you this drug could be abused, therefore it needs to be scheduled. It's like, no, it's absurd. Like, it's such a crazy like set of rules. I love this new abolish the DEA situation. I would love to see that happen. People go like, aren't they the enforcement arm of the FDA? It's like, no, they're not. They do their own thing. Like the OCI apparently is the name of the group that's kind of like the armed division of the FDA. I think that's more around like food quality and God knows what else. But there is a law enforcement group inside the FDA. It's not just like regulations.
Right.
And there's no like, what real benefit has the DEA provided us? You might say, oh, like pushback against the cartels. It's like, well, no, they're kind of in bed with the cartels. Like, I don't know if you remember that Fast and the Furious thing that Obama got caught up in, like planting tons of weapons, or like being involved in this like DEA quasi sting to provide tons of military grade weapons to a cartel, and the cartel ended up getting away with it. It was like they wanted to plant it, track it, and then the cartels just got away with it and like took loads and loads of military grade weapons from the feds. And like the drug war is only there. The cartels are only there because of the drug war that is in place. The finances would be far different if people weren't taking the legal risks they were in this pipeline. So when people say like, oh, I think we should decriminalize everything except for like, meth and heroin. I'm like, well, and cocaine. I'm like, well, yeah, cool. But you're not taking a big enough picture view here of the reforms we need in order to save the rainforest, decrease suffering in Colombia, Central America, Africa, Caribbean. Like there's so many places that are hosed because of the drug war. And, we're not even talking about countries where, dude, like Philippines, like there's some countries out there where if you have possession, you get killed by the government. Like I think North Korea, like they'll kill you if you get caught smoking meth, and there's a lot of meth smoking over there. And it's largely because of propaganda that we've put out that people are losing their lives. And, once that stuff opens up, it really opens up a lot for psychedelics and what they can do. I'm not saying I want more people to be smoking meth. I want, more people to have intelligent relationships with substances. And we need prohibition to go away before that can really develop fully.
Yeah. And to just like be able to provide that education and not have it so stigmatized, because maybe somebody doesn't actually want to be smoking meth but it's kind of what they do to get by, right? I don't know.
Right. Exactly. Like for a lot of people, the prospects of life are pretty dire. They don't look great. So meth looks like a great option. They're like, oh, cool. Like, let's just keep doing that because that was way more fun than my day-to-day usually is.
Yeah.
Same thing, same way like most addictions kind of start. It's tough. And I think we see that with LSD too. Like people that overuse LSD, people that overuse mushrooms are pretty out of control. And I don't think there necessarily is a reason to have an exception. They don't tend to be overused in the same way as heroin or meth, but they still are regularly overused by people. The people that are smoking DMT, like I know some people that smoke DMT sometimes 20 times a night. Right. So like, what are you doing? And the people that spent $100,000 on ayahuasca over the last couple of years, like, what does that mean?
Right.
What are you doing there? Are you really doing it skillfully and well? Like maybe, but also maybe not. And why is that worse or better than meth or cocaine or heroin or anything?
It's a great point when you put it that perspective. Like I spent like $100,000 on ayahuasca retreats to better myself versus I spent $100,000 on meth to survive and get by. Maybe to try to find a little bit of enjoyment. Maybe it makes somebody productive, right? Maybe somebody is struggling with like ADD and they find that to be like, oh, I can focus and do stuff. And I don't know, just speculating here.
Like stigma around drugs really blows my mind. Like on our Salvia article, people are constantly posting stuff like, well, it's better than coke and meth. It's like, well, what the hell? Like, what kind of, it's better than all that Adderall we're putting on kids' tongues. It's like, well, maybe, but maybe not. Like some people, maybe they want it. Maybe they need it because they don't want to lose their job or they want to get better grades in school. Like I had and still have a ferocious case of ADD that's never been diagnosed. I've been extraordinarily productive. If I ever need to use something like Adderall, like it works great.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much stigma around saying something like that in the psychedelic world. Like we're often a little too judgy is kind of my position.
Mm.
Like, oh, you vaccinated your kid. You're such a dickhead. It's like, oh, come on. Like, no, your kid in his senior year of high school had a really hard time and was prescribed Adderall. Cool. That's very different than your 5-year-old kid was given a bunch of psychiatric meds. Very different. I understand that. But, there's cases when it's appropriate. There's cases when it's not appropriate. And as long as there's informed consent and decent education, like it should be up to the individuals. And we should stay the fuck out of people's business. Do you really want to be all up in someone's business all the time? Like, cool. Like maybe America is not the place for you if you want to be in people's business all the time.
Yeah. Maybe this is just a thing from our blog here. So if you want to check out the recap from the election and the results, if you haven't, if this is totally new information to you, go over to psychedelicstoday.com/blog. And then it's recapping the biggest wins in drug laws and policies in the 2020 US election. So check that out. It gives a rundown of everything that passed. But here's a quote from the blog, and this is Sean Lawyer that wrote this for us. So thanks, Sean. And this is about Measure 110. So it says, a final implication of Measure 110 is that while psychedelics may be the substance of choice for readers of Psychedelics Today, it can be dangerous to over-glorify psychedelics at the expense of other drugs. Engaging in this, quote, psychedelic exceptionalism, unquote, can unconsciously perpetuate and embed racially motivated propaganda-induced stigmas around, quote, bad drugs. As Dr. Carl Hart told Psychedelics Today, quote, it's just wrong to vilify people for wanting to alter their consciousness and the particular drugs that they use, especially when you're doing the same thing with another drug, end quote. So nice little, I guess, thing to mention here on this conversation around drug policy, decriminalization, and other drugs here. And, I know I've been judgy too about certain drugs. And I think it's taken a lot of like self-reflection and just like thinking about the macro here and just thinking about drug policy in general. And it's like, I have to pull back and kind of examine my own psychedelic exceptionalism and try to put myself in like other people's shoes and figure out like, why are people using, and are these bad people? I had a lot of friends struggle with addiction and, watch people use stuff and, sometimes they didn't want to use, right? They might've been just stuck in a groove. They started using, it was a form of escapism. Now they're in it and it's really hard to get out of it. And who's me to say, like, I don't know, like this is bad. Yeah, of course, health-wise, it's bad. But, sometimes they didn't want to be in it. They wanted to get better, but just couldn't maybe reach out to find the resources for it because there is that stigma. How do you be open about your drug use with people? You usually hide it. You don't want to get help, and so I think we really need to kind of like challenge these narratives and keep kind of pushing for this, much larger drug policy at times than just looking at psychedelics, even though psychedelics are helpful tools.
Right. Like, I remember a while back, I was kind of rubbed the wrong way by this, but like Robert Anton Wilson said, cocaine, it's problematic, but it can be really helpful if you're about to give a lecture and you're exhausted. These things can be useful.
Freud loved cocaine.
Totally. Like, can we thank cocaine for Freudian and depth psychology? Perhaps in part. Why else would he have obsessively like looked at depth psychology to that degree? Pharmacology in like the mid to late 1800s, wild. Like the amount of drugs that were available wherever. Like you get that laudanum. So what is this stuff? Like cocaine, heroin, like drink mix. Like there's all sorts of fascinating things you could just buy straight up. And it's wild to consider that like and the public perspective on junkies was so different. Like people who were overusing or, substance use disorder back then, very different perspectives than what we have today of them. This is a new historical phenomenon, like the way we approach this thing. Like it's kind of true that cultures only had like one or two drugs that they liked. But, now we're in this kind of new cosmopolitan era where there's so many different, like, yeah, you could think American culture is one thing, but American culture is like 500 things.
Yeah.
Like it's not one thing. And like, we're going to demonize parts of our culture and glorify others.
Mm-hmm.
Like think about how we think about moonshiners, like bourbon manufacturers.
Right.
Compared to somebody that cooks up, grows mushrooms. Like, what does the mass culture think about somebody that got busted for growing? It's like crazy. Like even underground grows of cannabis, like it's nuts. The rhetoric that gets put around these people.
Right. Criminals.
It's not
right?
fair. Yeah. It's not nice.
Yeah.
It's not fair. It's not like the evolved way of going about it. So like we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. It makes me think about the intersection here of kind of what we cover with like, psychedelics, drugs, but also stigmatizing mental health. And I think drug policy and mental health are two challenges. I mean, I think people are becoming more open with mental health, but just even thinking about like with Will Hall and talking about like diagnostic criteria and labels, I watched this like little conference that one of my friend's roommates helped put together at one of her companies. And they showed this trailer for a movie called Hiding in Plain Sight. And they interviewed a lot of, experiencers, survivors of mental health issues. And one thing that like really kind of stood out by some of the people speaking in like the little trailer clips was like how easy it is just to point the finger at somebody and call them crazy. Oh, they're crazy, they're insane, and using this language to really kind of continue to stigmatize somebody that may feel really depressed, or maybe they are having lots of emotional ups and downs. It's so easy to point the finger and say, well, nothing that they say is valid because they're crazy, right? Or they have bipolar. Or I think the same thing with drug use too. And I think there's a lot of overlap between these two fields here. It's like we can point fingers at somebody and say, oh, well, they use this substance and they're a bad person, or they're a criminal. And, oh, this person's just insane because they cry too often and they're all up and down and they can't control their emotions. They can't function. And so, I think there's a huge fight that we need to kind of engage in here to try to destigmatize these two worlds. And I don't know, it feels like that's definitely been part of a mission for us, is trying to explore this. How do we destigmatize and try to normalize mental health issues and drug issues?
Like we had that person reach out, I forget her name already, but kind of trying to steer us away from using the term addict, saying like Darlene, yeah, thank you, Darlene, substance use disorder, and like the actual data behind how that shapes how people perceive the, sufferer. Like it's pretty intense. Like the amount of stigma calling someone an addict versus somebody suffering from SUD, very different. And shame's like one of the biggest ingredients here. Like I know, thank God I came out to my family about all this stuff. Like I no longer have that interpersonal kind of family dynamic shame, which is amazing. It's such a weight off my shoulder. And, imagine the person that's hiding their heroin addiction heroin substance use disorder for like, 20 years. They've been able to maintain it, but the amount of shame they have is unbelievable and so toxic. Mm-hmm. And like, they're still a human and they can still be loved and show love and still do good, even though they're using. Like, it's kind of hard for us to believe that. But like, you start learning about what's going on in Switzerland, it's a totally different world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was like this like trauma-informed phrase that I learned a while ago in some sort of training, trying to reframe this notion of what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. And I think, if we can kind of reframe that, it really makes us more curious about somebody's past and history and experiences in life versus like saying like there's something inherently wrong with you versus like, well, what have you been through? What's going on in your life right now? And, how has that led you to where you're at today?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. It's a big deal. So I'm thinking we might want to jump to the next topic, which I think was breathwork, if you're up for it, unless you have more here.
No, yeah, I guess we have about like 10 minutes to scratch breath work for a little bit.
So somebody reached out to us and said they wanted us to kind of discuss breath work more at length. We mention it all the time, but we never really get into what it is. I would say, like, for most workshops, Kyle, like giving an introduction for like at least an hour
Hmm.
of like what they can expect, like what's the history of it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we have an episode on breath work. If people want to go back and check it out, I think it's just called "What is Transpersonal Breath Work" or "What is Breath Work?" And maybe we'll do another episode, but we can dig into it for 10 minutes or so. But yeah, we could talk hours about this. But I guess like the question is, how would you define breath work? Like, what is it to you?
Mm. It's my favorite. It's something I've been doing for so long that it's like my most comfortable, somehow least scary method of going inside and doing inner work, because I know I have this safe cultural container, like safe container with people I trust and love. And it's like always just helpful and amazing. Like, even if I don't get the experience I want, just being there in community is still like medicine enough. And I guess like I kind of want to back up though. So LSD psychotherapy was happening, became illegal. They were hanging out. The Groffs were hanging out in Esalen. And turns out they were able to synthesize this technique, holotropic breath work, from everything they were seeing at Esalen and their psychedelic work. And Christina brought in music, which is really amazing. Yeah, to me, it's just like this perfect synthesis of like, humanistic techniques, including music, touch, community, somatic techniques, even if they're not as sophisticated as we could probably make them now with like the developments in somatic psych. We'll work on that later, Kyle, but I think that's a big project we've got to do. Yeah, it's, just a beautiful thing. And our teachers have, studied with Stan and Christina to the point where the Gibsons at Dream Shadow were given kind of a rubber stamp from Stan to start their own separate training program, essentially teaching the same thing as holotropic breathwork, just under a different moniker. Slightly different because there's some philosophy stuff built in, but largely the same. So like that whole story really helps me contextualize it. But I guess maybe I'll let you kind of take a stab at it, like what it is for you. Like, what has it helped you with?
Yeah, I think like when people always ask me like what is breath work, I always start off saying like it's an umbrella term for various techniques and practices, and there's lots of different breathing techniques out there. And so, it's an umbrella term to start with. And so, we look at like different meditation and yogic traditions, there's breathing techniques and breathwork practices. So the lineage that Joe and I come from is more in this like self-discovery, kind of cathartic, transpersonal breath work, where it includes deep, intensified breathing, full breath, circular breathing, minimal pause in between. And, it really fosters a deep inner exploration and, a way to explore consciousness in a sense. And so, yeah. So, breathwork's this umbrella term. There's lots of different techniques out there. And a lot of people are kind of riffing off of what's already been done before, right? Like before holotropic breathwork was developed, Leonard Orr had rebirthing breathwork. Wilhelm Reich was exploring the power of breath with some of his work. And then Stan and Christina came around, developed holotropic breathwork. And now there's like all sorts of different breathwork techniques out there.
It's like hundreds.
Breaths, shamanic breath work, transformational breath work. I mean, there's tons. And they all, I think, have their different flavor and different type of practice. Like, maybe they all incorporate some sort of element of deep circular breathing. Some other ones I've heard incorporate this 2 or 3 part breathing, or deep inhales and a more natural exhale. Some are shorter, some are longer. Holotropic breathwork and transpersonal breathwork is, a much longer session, maybe 2 to 3 hours in length for you to breathe. I usually create those playlists for around 3 hours. And, people are wearing eye shades, they go inside, they listen to loud music in a group context and really, let their inner healer bring things up and explore. And so from our tradition, it comes from, that psychedelic psychotherapy background from Stan and just some of his transpersonal framework for understanding these experiences. While other breathwork techniques may not, they might draw on some of Stan's theories and ideas, but I think what makes holotropic breathwork pretty interesting is a lot of Stan's clinical work and integrating what he saw during his LSD psychotherapy days and being able to observe what was going on in holotropic breathwork and make connections there, and thinking back to what he saw during his clinical time and seeing maybe similar observations during holotropic breathwork, and having that whole cartography of the psyche, as Stan would say, with the transpersonal and perinatal domains. So I think that's what makes that form a little special, is some of the theoretical framework that he's provided.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal too. Like, a big part of it is sitting around and doing storytelling, like after the sessions, if you're at like a weekend retreat. And often you'll just hear stories about Stan or Michael Harner or like Jack Kornfield or Christina Groff or, Joan Halifax even. Like there's a lot of people that are kind of like legends in the space. We'll just sit around sharing stories, start speculating do like speculative philosophy on like Tibetan Buddhism and like rainbow body and like all these different things. Like, have you heard about Wim Hof? Like, what do you think of Wim Hof, Joe? Like, stuff like that. It's really interesting. Like the amount of new ideas, like everybody's smart largely and brings stuff they want to chat about. And it's like, that to me is like intellectual community that's really hard to get.
Yeah, it's pretty special.
And the fact that you're sharing that with people that you went through like serious inner states with, like that, kind of adds a certain kind of richness to it. It's like a trust and community that's unparalleled in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the building blocks are what? Accelerated breathing, evocative music,
focused
bodywork, group,
process.
And then, so
art,
safety too. Ken, what the hell's his name? The guy that's living in Germany, Ken Sloan, maybe.
Sloan.
Yeah. He, at one point said, we add a 6 in safety is what we call it. Like we always just kind of say our job is to make you safe. Like as facilitators, like we want you to be safe. Our number one priority is safety over anything else. So like, we just say 5, but he says 6 just to like punctuate that in a safe container is like pretty serious, part of the ingredients for this thing.
It's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, a lot of people, I think, have been asking us about online breath work. And this is where kind of like the safety aspect comes into play for us. I mean, I've done some online breath work in small groups or with like, individuals, and it's very short and titrated, but it's nothing to the extent of what we would be offering in a weekend workshop or like a weekend retreat. And I think safety is a big part of that, and part of the reason why we wouldn't offer a full-on type of experience like that online, because it can be very intense energetically and physically, and people can find themselves in states where they bring trauma back up. And when I think about, there is this critique with catharsis and, these quote unquote primal therapies, and primal therapies, I guess from the somatic world kind of mentions what really kind of came out of Esalen at that time. So thinking about re-traumatization, and the container can be really important for that. So if a trauma does emerge, something comes up that feels traumatic, being able to provide that safe container to work through it helps resolution. But if you bring it up now and you're not able to resolve it, maybe you get stuck in your body and you have all this pain and nobody's around and it starts to get scary, and, can't do body work with somebody or just not be there. Or what if somebody starts rolling around on the ground and they bang into a bookshelf, it falls on top of them, right? There's a lot of different variables that we can't control in that online space. But, in age of COVID, there's been times where it's like, how do we make parts of this accessible and maybe do these very kind of modified versions, not trying to go into deep catharsis. I had a friend reach out a couple of years ago who was training to be a therapist and went to some holotropic breathwork retreats and participated in some online breath work and said that it activated trauma that stuck with them for about 2 weeks. And here's somebody with experience that felt that, right? But again, it's like, I think sometimes we have to try to be creative and figure out like how to make it accessible in a time when we can't do some of this work, but it's not something that we've publicly like been venturing into, or I haven't really. I mean, people ask me all the time. And if I do that work, it's after developing a relationship with somebody and really doing a modified version of what we would be offering, just thinking about that safety, that container and whatnot. My friend Lucas and I were running an inner work group, and we did include breathwork into that group around like 30 minutes or so. And, we also spent time staying after with people for like an hour and a half to debrief outside of the allotted time because it felt like things weren't resolved. And, I know there's probably people that offer this work that, the workshop ends and it ends. Like, are they going to stick around for another hour and a half, 2 hours with that person if stuff came up? So yeah, safety is, I think, our number one priority.
Right. It's a tough discussion, like I really, really, really wish I could do breath work with people right now in group. Like I'm somewhat comfortable doing one-on-ones in person, but that lowers the risk profile, but there's still risk there. Yeah. And the thing you said earlier, like somebody having trauma triggered for like a week or so after, like, that's tough, but perhaps it was part of the healing process. Like
definitely
sometimes shit needs to get worse before it gets better,
Yeah.
Especially in the psychological realm, I think. It could be nice if you could kind of shortcut that, but you can't shortcut everything,
Yeah, you bring up a really great point there. And, I always wonder, and I know we've had these conversations, but just even thinking about like COVID has really, forced things upon us, and just thinking about like when people started doing at-home ketamine. I mean, that's been around for a bit, right? But it seemed like once kind of COVID hit, there are more people offering telehealth sessions with ketamine. And so I think about that, right? Like, all right, we say that psychedelics are relatively safe, right? And if somebody doesn't have, access to it, but they're to like a therapeutic setting and a place that they could go and they do it at home, is it actually providing some sort of harm reduction and safety by just even being there with somebody? And so I always question, okay, people are doing this already. Like, all right, we're doing ketamine at home. What's the difference between doing that versus doing breath work at home with somebody online with you? I'd say, I don't know, seems pretty similar at times, but again, it's like risk analysis. Does the person have a good support system? Are they in an environment where they feel safe enough to do that self-exploration? If they're doing breath work where a lot more energy can come up, I think, versus ketamine, they rolling around, what does their physical environment look like? Making sure they aren't bumping into things, or, they have candles lit and they knock into it, and there's all these kind of different factors here. But, something that I've been really kind of thinking about moving forward, and, how do we get creative? How do we innovate, but also stay safe as well? I think these are a lot of questions to explore. If you are a practitioner, you're offering this type of work, if you're offering online psychedelic work.
Yeah. Yeah, COVID forced us to re-examine a lot of stuff, and perhaps worth mentioning again, I thought we beat it to death at the beginning of quarantine, but like the fact that folks are still doing group ayahuasca sessions is really problematic to me. Like I get why some people think COVID risk is overstated. Like I understand that, but I've been spending a lot of time talking to nurses, doctors, and people actually seeing folks die. And it's not a pretty death. It's not. And like, even if you're not going to die and get in the ICU, like there's still harm, like cardiac risk. Like there's like,
long-term health benefits. My old roommate actually was featured in BuzzFeed
yeah.
News. about his experience, about just like prolonged effects, getting better, not getting better, having like this post-viral fatigue syndrome and flare-ups. I mean, so yeah, even if it's a mild case, which it sounds like, not severe enough to go to the hospital, he's still struggling with a lot of kind of like post-viral issues. So,
right. And I think there's now data around the harm to children, which is pretty extreme at times. And then also like the brain risk. Like there's actually some damage done to brains, which is pretty crazy. Not to mention like semi-permanent lung damage. Like it's pretty friggin' wild. And like, sure, like maybe the spirit of ayahuasca is there to help keep you safe. The same degree to which it's maybe the case, the same degree it might not be the case. Like I don't have any evidence that shows this spirit blocks virus transmission. Like maybe you do, but and even if it's not for you, it's for like how many of us are going to lose our parents to this?
Right.
Like they're being as careful as they can given their, age, but nothing's perfect. And, sometimes we just need to slow down for a little bit. It's a real privilege to be able to take all these risks, but you also put other people at risk. So please think twice about ayahuasca in the time of COVID. There's just so much room for transmission. Our hospitals here, you saw that meme yesterday. Like, hospitals here in Colorado are getting ready to like put 3 people in an ICU room together. And there's like barely enough room for 2. And then the nurses have to somehow get around that. And that just like amplifies nurse, like medical worker exposure.
Are cases kind of really spiking in Colorado?
We're coming back to like April, May levels, which is pretty fucked up.
I think the other day, New Jersey was at like 3,800 new cases. It's usually above like 2,000 cases each day.
It's pretty wild. I'm not really psyched about it. I'm really freaked out. Will probably have not seen any of my family for a full year by the time I get to see them, which is pretty hard. Like, could lose grandparents and I won't even get to go to their funeral and that kind of stuff. Like, there's so many scary things. And this is just me. This is one person with kind of an affluent, life. Well, kind of, not really, but, yeah. So people that are even more downtrodden, like their harm and risk profile is even higher. Yeah. I don't have any great answers. I have a lot of problems to talk about, but, just slow down, be careful, wash your hands a lot, cover your face, please. Yeah. Like if you're far away from somebody and walking around outside, that's probably legit. But, if you're in public for real, near people, like it's on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just always think about like, we always preach like harm reduction. And I think this is a form of harm reduction, right? Maybe you're in a chance of like low risk, but why not be safe and protect the people around you as well? So I think it's just important to just view it as harm reduction in general, right?
Right. It's all harm reduction. Like, how do we help people make informed decisions? And this is part of it. That's why it's psychedelic. And, that's why we should have safer ayahuasca sessions. Like if you're going to do it with somebody, like maybe you hole up for a couple of weeks, you both get tests and then you go for it and you're not exposed to other people. But, there's also risks there because you're holed up with one individual. And who's to say there wouldn't be like unsafe sexual situations developing over the course of a few days?
Right.
We're working to post some really interesting articles soon, everybody, on the sexual issues in psychedelics. So stay tuned. It's going to be cool. Well, we're over an hour, Kyle.
Yeah.
I guess we should wrap. Hope that was helpful for folks, interesting enough. Sorry, it's not more upbeat. There's a lot to be upbeat about, but there's also some risks that we got to be careful about. So yeah, thank you all for listening. We've launched our dates for Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, the live 8-week edition that'll be starting in January through the end of February on Thursdays, 2 different time slots available. Like if you wanted to get more clients to talk more about psychedelics, like this is a great way to get those skills in your therapy practice, to be able to speak about that. We also offer certificates and CE credits. So if you need CE credits, like that's definitely available to you. Yeah, and we give you a lot of tools that you can use to work with these people. So really great understanding paired with tools. And then you're a lot better equipped to see people who, maybe had trouble in an ayahuasca session, now need some help. I hate to keep picking on ayahuasca. It just seems like the most commonly used ceremonial psychedelic. So,
or you live in a place where it's starting to get decriminalized and people are starting to come and have experiences and don't really know how to navigate that with clients. So,
right. Absolutely.
Get ready for the wave.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing, I was talking to Brad Burge yesterday, former PR director for MAPS, who's now running his own PR firm, but he paired with a few others to help launch this, I think, all volunteer psychedelic help call line. So you're in your bedroom or you're lost in the middle of a city somewhere, you can call this number, get some help, and have somebody to talk to mid-session. So I don't know what the training's going to look like there. Hopefully it's kind of Zendo oriented, which I think will be the case. But yeah, stay tuned for that fireside project. Yeah, and I guess that's it for now. Check out psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Join our email list if you want to hear about events we're up to, psychedelicsday.com, and tell a friend, leave us a review. And we'll see you on the next episode in a few days. Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Take care, everybody.
See y'all. Bye-bye.